Good morning. I'm really happy to be able to share a project that I'm involved in. And I wanted to start by reading Philippians 1, verse 6. Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. And when God calls us, he doesn't abandon us, does he? I want to start back. When I was a child, I wasn't very popular. I was dyslexic. People didn't know about it, and I didn't get on with adults very well. Most of them thought I wasn't very clever. And one place I found that really accepted me was a church. It was a Methodist church. It was very child-friendly. And when the doors were open, there I was. And one day I found myself at the front of a mission meeting. And the lady talking was talking about her work in Africa. And perhaps I wasn't behaving, and I was sat on the front row. And so she asked me how old I was. And then she asked me what I'd done to help my family that day. And I said, well, I'm 7. I don't do anything. They do it for me. So she told me a little story about a child of 7 in the African village where she was, and how they would have to get the water and perhaps help with younger children. And then at the end, she challenged me. She said, look, you are a child that's very fortunate. You can have free national health treatment. You have free education. And she said, God loves you, but he loves everybody, and he loves those people in the African village as much as he loves you. He said, what are you going to do about it? And I said, oh, right, when I'm old, I shall go to Africa and I shall help my brothers and sisters there. And I kept remembering it and imagining myself in some little African village doing something. Well, when I was 14, I made a decision to follow Jesus. I wasn't quite sure who he was or whether he really was the Son of God, and I wasn't quite sure whether there was a God or not. But I thought, if you say there isn't a God and there is, you made a bad decision. So I decided to follow Jesus. And I left school at 15, and I had no qualifications. And when I was 16, I was thinking that I want to do something that's a Christian, and I called in at the local hospital and asked to see the matron. And I told her that I was a Christian, that I wanted to follow Jesus, and I thought I would like to go to Africa and be a nurse there. And I said, I am intelligent, I can't spell. And so she took me on as a cadet nurse. I had a nice uniform and strutted around the hospital. And by the time I was 18, people thought that, yes, I could make a nurse. And they allowed me to take the SRN, it was called, and state registered nurse, and train. But then, just after I'd got the qualification, I met Ewan and fell in love with him, and we got married. And we had a great life together. He, at one point, was a community leader in Toxteth, Liverpool, and then became a pastor. We had 5 children. I helped run playgroups, keep fit classes, English classes, Sunday school, and eventually I became a health visitor, and it was a great life with lots of opportunities to serve God, and you can ask Ewan about it all sometime. But then when I got to 50, I asked Ewan if I could go and work in Africa just for a few months, and he agreed. And so I sent my CV off. I sent it off to lots of NGOs. I'd just learned how to write CVs and how to send them on computers. But I got messages back that more or less said, well, get lost, you're 50, you've never been out of Europe, and just 3 months, it'll take you that time to acclimatise and be of any use. But then the Rwandan genocide took place, and they needed a nurse to run a feeding programme at one NGO that I hardly remember sending a CV to. And so it wasn't really my idea of the first time of going overseas, but nobody else had asked me, so I decided, yes, I'd go. And I found that I could just get off the plane and get stuck in and do a reasonable job. And having got that on my CV, the NGO world opened up to me, and I went to many different countries in Africa and in Asia, including Afghanistan and Sudan. And I found that my skills could be used there, that I did fit in. But it wasn't quite what I'd promised when I was 7. It wasn't quite my idea. So it wasn't quite what I'd promised God that I wanted to do. Then Ewan became the pastor of a little chapel in Epping Green. It's a village just outside London. And it was quite small, socially ascending, white mainly, and not quite me. Then one of my Kenyan friends came to visit, and she and I wondered what I could do, to fit in with the village and fit in with Ewan at this church. And she suggested, why don't you twin the church and village to a new church that's just opened in the Turkana area of Kenya. Now, it was part of the African Gospel Church. The African Gospel Church in Kenya is really good, and it was their ambition to start churches in every people group in Kenya. And it seemed a good idea, and this was up in the Turkana, very remote. And so we took on the challenge. So Ewan and I first went to Lokichar, that was the name of the village, in 2006. The pastor there was called Walter Rutter, and he was a lovely pastor, but he was a Nairobi man, and he couldn't speak the language, and he wasn't really used to living in such remote conditions. But he developed a small congregation, and this congregation was mainly traditional Turkana people. Now, the Turkana people were nomadic, but the rivers had dried up and there was no grass and water around Lokichar, and we think it was due to global warming. And so the people, to get water, had to go into the dry riverbed and make big holes in the river, and then they had to dig down deep and get water out just in little containers. So when we got back and told the church and told the village, we were able to raise money and send it to make a borehole. That was the first thing we did. The water table was 70 metres deep, and so it needed a proper drilling company to do it, and we managed to do that. But then I remember the phrase that you probably heard, give a man a fish and he's hungry again. But give him a rod and he can fish for himself. And so I thought, well, if we're going to get involved with this village, we need to make them so that they can help themselves. The school, in Epping Green Village, the top class was looking at Africa, and they invited me to go and speak to the children. So I told them about Africa, I told them about Kenya, the nice things about Kenya, and then I homed on to the village of Lokichar. And they were so impressed. And one of the things I showed them was my bracelet that they'd made, the women had made for me. And they said, those bracelets are really nice and we could sell them. So we got 800 of them sent to us. And the children sold them in 1 week. And in that week, they were just so delighted to give me the money. And we sent that money to the women. The women had never had money before, and with it, they built a little house. Well, it was 2 little houses. It was made with corrugated iron, wood, mud sides, and skimmed with concrete. And those houses, they rented them, and each month, with the money, they looked around for a woman who needed something that was in need, and then they bought a hen and gave it to them, or whatever they could afford. And they sent a lovely little email back to the children saying, we women had given up, we'd prayed to God, we didn't know how to feed our children, and far away in another country, you children answered our prayers, and now we know that God loves us. And the children were so pleased, and they were crying when I read it to them. So that was the very start. I mean, after that, we had projects with chickens and eggs and sewing machines for the girls and lots of other projects. And then the big projects began to start when they decided to build a school. when Ewan retired from Epping Green, the people who were enthusiastic about the project were getting a bit sort of older and frailer and didn't feel able to keep up the contact. But I just felt I had to stay in touch with them because they were my friends. I'd got to like them. I knew people well. So the Turkana people had quickly realised that their children couldn't follow in their footsteps looking after cattle. And they realised that education was the way forward. So they started a little preschool just with a few children in to prepare them to be able to go to school. And they called it at that time Noreen's Academy. It was just made of bits of corrugated iron with a corrugated roof. And in this country, we would have put chickens in it or something like that. The idea was that the children couldn't start class 1 until they got a certain level of education. So it was like a preschool to get them to that level. And the first children worked hard and they graduated in an American style, which was not my idea at all. And where the mortarboards and things come from, I don't know, but that's what happened. And then, of course, there was no class 1, so they had to build a class 1 and then later a class 2, and more corrugated iron was used. Fortunately, God has given me the strength to work, and I really like working. I don't like sitting around doing nothing, retired with my feet up. And so I was able to work and fund the school. So right from the start, they paid the teachers' wages, and I gave money for brick buildings and proper latrines and things like that to bring the school up to proper standard. They were doing very well, and I thought really the time was coming when I could hand over to them. But then lockdown made it really difficult for the school. There was new regulations, and the parents couldn't go out to work to earn money to pay the teachers. It was a problem, but the schools stayed open even though the lockdown rules for adults was very strict. But no longer could there be 4 children squashed into a desk. There had to be 2. They had to have masks. We had to have more classrooms. Then rules about not eating food outside and they had to have a dining room. Then we had to have a fence round it and then a gate. So it has a big ornate gate that says Noreen's School now. So when I look back, I've had a great life. I loved working with Ewan in Toxteth. I loved doing relief and disaster work. And then this is where we know that God is faithful. And perhaps just this week, Samuel was talking about patience. And if we're patient, sometimes our ambitions take a long time to be fulfilled. But now I'm going for my 80th birthday. And the words in Philippians have come true for me. I thank my God every time I remember you, because I do thank God for the things that he's done for me, and I thank God for what he's doing in Lokichar. In my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy. And I have joy when I look at Lokichar, because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And they really work hard at spreading the gospel to other people. Being confident of this, that he who has begun a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. So this has been true in my life, and it seems to be true in the church at Lokichar. And I believe it's the same for all of you listening. 2 Corinthians 9 says, "And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all things that you need, you will abound in every good work." So I just want to end with saying that following Jesus has its ups and downs, and there have been problems when I've been doing relief and disaster works. There have been things that have upset me and that I don't know the answer to. But mainly it's been an exciting adventure. Sometimes it's more difficult as you get older, but I believe that God can use us in every stage of our lives. So I just hope that you'd be encouraged by this. It's an interesting place, Lokichar, and I've just been so pleased to be involved in it. And I hope it'll encourage you to get involved with projects as well. Thank you.